It's going to be a legacy summer.
Next on Eternal Durdles.
Hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our Patreon supporters out there. Thank you to the Durdle Maniacs. If you want to be a Durdle Maniac, go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles and help support the channel. It keeps things going. It keeps things updated. Thanks so much for watching. On with the show. Hello and welcome to Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Blackman. Phil, how's your summer going so far?
Zach, they haven't given me a Sensei's Divining Top reprint of any kind that is playable in Legacy, so, it's going how it's always been.
The summer is ruined. I understand. Yeah,
it's all gone.
So this episode, I want to talk about. I want to talk about a few things. One, I got to play in a like a half K, the local, the local meta half K that happens once a month over at the Dark Depths Game Shop. So we'll talk about my experience there, which was the experience is great. I didn't do so well. Spoiler alert. But beyond that, I want to talk about like some other stuff that's happened. One, we have both now booked our tickets to Las Vegas, so we will see you in Las Vegas. Make sure to find us. We'll be giving out stickers. I bought stickers, decals, as it were. So they're like that big.
Put your little decal on your deck box.
Yeah, put your decal on your deck box or your suitcase. My suitcase has all the decals I get from people. So that's what
we're gonna make a whole ordeal out of putting our own decals on all our stuff.
Yes. So that's cool. That's gonna be fun. Still waiting to hear if I got a panel or not. So
the last panel was great. For anybody who didn't check it out, you can see the link where Zach is pointing to right now.
Yeah.
Bang, right there.
Yeah. So yeah, that panel was great. I got to basically interview Morrow and Seth from aka Saffron Olive from MTG Goldfish about Magic Media, which was pretty cool. And I'm going to try and run it back again with some updates if they allow that to happen, which would be pretty fun. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at for as far as like plans and stuff for going for the summer. We recorded a bonus episode for our paid supporters. So if you pay $5 or $4.99 or whatever it is on Spotify, YouTube, or Patreon, you'll have access incoming for our bonus episodes that we're going to be doing once a week as well. So if you're not, this is a great time to jump into that. Anybody who is in the in those tiers will get to hear that content. It's Magic adjacent, I would say. We definitely talk about Magic in there, but there's some other stuff going on that we wanted to talk about too. That's like it's bonus content.
Everything in our lives is Magic adjacent, Zach.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. If you play Magic, that's just how it works.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So and then Phil, you also had you've been obviously featured on 90s MTG a lot lately. You look like you're doing all right with miracles.
Yeah, there's the one thing that is very clear about the stuff that I do is that you can't play 3 and 4 drops in this format if they don't win you the game absolutely immediately, and that's that.
Yeah.
But let me tell you, man, for miracles, deduces the truth.
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored
I've been watching
by Moxfield.
those matches,
Moxfield is
and
the
I gotta
best
say,
gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks
to
from
anybody
Commander
who doesn't
to Legacy,
obviously already know.
even
like
fan-supported
watching you
formats
play
like
miracles
Pre-Modern
is
and
like
Old School.
it's an absolute
You can see
masterclass
all of our decks
because
on our
just
Moxfield.
watching like you
Follow the
navigate,
links
you're
below
like, okay,
to
well
stay
I'm gonna
tuned.
put this on top and this, and like I think you were playing its lands, the one I was watching, and you just like obliterated this your opponent in what was like a 50-minute like game. It was a very long game.
It was a very sloggy game 1, and there's a very distinct point where I forget exactly my position. I don't know if I had access to a certain CMC, but there was a point where I stacked a 2 on top of the counterbalance, and then I was able to get through a crop rotation, and it was just so very clear. I mean, it was the last round of the event, and it was a super sloggy game 1. But in that position, there was just no rationale for me to put a 2 on top to counter a loam instead of the more threatening piece, which would be a crop rotation. So I should have stacked a 1 when I stacked a 2. So appreciate you enjoying my style of play. And also you got that's a glimpse into why the deck is so fun to play, because it just feels like it is forever impossible to play absolutely 100% at maximum, because there are so many decision trees to be made at all points that involve so much context to game and context to opponent, and that's why it's fun. So
yeah, I mean, obviously not my style. If anybody's been watching me on Twitch lately, I do be making mistakes all the time.
Yeah, man, we're gonna get into it, but when I watch, regardless of format, when I watch combo players, there's like the combo decks have to navigate such a narrow lane of different axes that they have to care about, that the few and far points, like when you get an adrenaline, like when you see an adrenaline rush moment from a combo deck of like navigating around something perfectly and getting your opponent to play into something that they otherwise probably shouldn't have played into based on like certain whatever's, like that feels like that adrenaline rush is probably really high, right? But I feel like it happens so few and far between, where there are mostly just non-games of ships passing in the night, where my style of miracles is you can't play counterbalance goldfishing. You can't goldfish.
Well, that is the thing. Like you have to get in your reps against other people. That was always a thing. As a kid, even I always was bummed because every summer my parents were divorced, so every summer I would have to fly out to Ohio where no one played Magic. All of my friends in Jersey still played Magic. I'd go to Ohio for the summer and I'd bring decks. My sister didn't want to learn Magic, so I couldn't play with my sister. And I'd try and like goldfish against myself, or even worse, I'd literally play two decks at the same time against each other. Like, what would I do if I was in this spot? What would I do if I was in this spot? Which is, it's great practice, but it doesn't hit the same way. Because if I'm playing Necropotence and then I'm playing blue-white control, right? Because this is like Ice Age era, like Alliances era. Sure, maybe I kind of think that my opponent might have force of will, but if I actually know I am my opponent and I have force of will, it's always just like, how do you get in good games when you're playing alone in a control deck, right? Like playing a control deck by yourself is really not fun as far as like goldfishing is concerned. Like you can understand how your deck works a little bit and be like, okay, well, like in my head, this is what they'd be doing. Should I leave up mana? On turn 2, that kind of stuff. But like, really, it's all about what you're doing against your opponent. And so if you're not playing, you don't necessarily play against decks when you're playing control. You're playing against the other player a lot of times, and I think that's, it's just one of those things that's sort of a bummer as a control player. Like you can't goldfish.
I think the only thing you can goldfish is opening hands that you would keep in the blind. And if you were looking at your hands thinking, okay, I'd keep this in the blind just because it's a good mixture of stuff, as opposed to what are you actually doing? Again, go back to your ABCs, fam. Like if you open your hand and you're a control deck and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to be contextual based on what my opponent is doing, so I can't actually play out, a line or whatever. But if you open a hand and you're thinking, okay, what's my deck actually trying to do? If your opening hand doesn't do that or help you find a way to do that, then you probably should ship that hand. And like just, opening hands is probably the most you're really going to get out of goldfishing in the dark hands as a control player.
Yeah.
And with combo or anything else, you can goldfish actually getting your mechanics down.
It's funny we're talking about opening hands right now because I was thinking this, all week since Friday. So on Friday I played at Dark Depths. I played in it's a 4-round like half K. You pay $25. They split up like $500 worth of prizes between the top 4, I think. And I gotta be honest, I've done it for like 6 or 7 months now, and I have never once even cashed like top 4. It's cut off at like I think 16 people. So like I have never once had a positive record, which is funny because like normally I can bank like a Magic Online. I can bank like a 3-2 if I really try not too hard, right? But the opening hands thing is funny because so I played in round 1. I played against Riscaminator and I won because I've been playing against that match so much that I know what matters, right? You just like look at your opener. You're like, well, will this survive? A grief reanimate grief. If they don't have a follow up, right? Like you have to just assume like if they don't, if their grief reanimate grief into next turn entomb reanimate Atraxa, there's no one beating that hand. Like you really have to be trying extremely hard to beat that hand. But so the first match I ended up winning. In fact, the first game I got grief reanimated grief, and I followed it up with a beanstalk into another beanstalk. I started taking damage. It was like playing Delver. You're just taking damage, trying to like get past the development stage of the deck. And then I drew a ley line. I ley lined the grief. Came back with a what's called Troll Kaza Doom. Reanimated that. I took like a couple hits off of that. Finally got rid of that. Drew another beanstalk. Now I have 3 beanstalks. Played a Draco, and the game was pretty much over from there because I think I actually tapped and put a ley line into play. Now, the point I wanted to make about the opening hand thing is that particular deck has a real funky like opening hand situation where you have to evaluate your opening hand based on, do I have Leyline of the Guild Pact and do I have Force of Will? Like, can I deal with my opponent's nonsense and like I want to do my proactive plan, right? Like, so it's an interesting place to be when you're when you're playing a deck that is a control deck that has like a plan against other decks, but at the same time you have a plan, like you have a proactive game plan that you want to be doing, which is to put have Leyline of the Guild Pact in play when you play a turn 2 Draco or whatnot. So in the next round I played against I think Death Shadow. Ben was on Death Shadow, and he Harbinger of the Tides just got me. Like there's nothing I can do against a Harbinger of the Tides. It's just like Blood Moon. Like it doesn't, Leyline of the Guild Pact doesn't care about it. And then same thing happened in the next round, but it was like this Buried Alive Sneaky Snacker build with Harbinger. So I just got crushed again by another Harbinger of the Seas. And then in the next round, what do you know? I played against a Blood Moon deck and got Blood Moon out of the game. So, we said this in our last episode. There's never been a worse time to be playing. What's it called? There's never been a worse time to be playing like a greedy mana base. And man, my mana base is super greedy. And I think the lessons that I learned this weekend were that I need to be paying more attention to my keeps and not just like trying to do the proactive plan. I need to play to not lose in a lot of these scenarios, which is not my normal style of play. I don't like to play to not lose, but like if you just don't get to play your game at all because your opponent like turn 1, Soul Land, Simian Spirit Guide, here's a here's a Blood Moon, and you just don't get to play the game. Like that happened to me two games in a row. I think, what are we doing? Like that's not fun for me. I need to learn to mulligan more aggressively against decks that just have buttons that shut me off.
Yeah, I mean, if you know that you're playing against those, then yes.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's always going to be that bottleneck. If you're playing a game if you're playing a deck that intends to go long, then you have to assume that whatever tools your opponent has will show up. It's not like, there's no going under if you're like assuming the control role in a matchup. And if you're going into every match in the dark going, I'm always going to assume that role, regardless of what my opponent is doing until I learn what they're doing, then, there can be positions where that changes if, let's say, you're playing something similar to a mirror, or both players are assuming that they're taking the control role. Then depending on who is assuming that role harder in their deck building, and then what are your board plans? Are you getting a more aggressive slant? If you were boarding into Triumph of St. Catherine's or something like that. Like if you and I, if we paired your Beanstalk control deck versus my control deck, I mean, you're going to bury me because Beanstalks are the only thing that matters, which is why that card's boring. But regarding who is the control player versus who is the who should take the aggro role in that matchup, you would take the aggro role, right? Because you have ways to proactively push advantage, where mine revolves around stopping what you're doing via counterbalance, right? So Beanstalk is asking you to do things, right? Not to react to things. You have to do things in order to convert those card advantage, where counterbalance is only going to convert the card advantage by responding to what you do. So just inherently, based on the kind of control deck that you are, is going to slant where you fit on that spectrum. And but both decks would revolve around, if your opponent's going to do something, the game is not going to end in a short enough time frame for you to not expect to see whatever their deck does, that you're going to have to handle it. So whatever everybody else's plan A is and their ABCs, like you have to assume that you're going to run into their A, their B, and their C somewhere over the course of your game, if not most definitely your match, unless something actually just totally shits out on them. Like, a combo deck, like, it's fail rate hitting it, and you just happen to be the fortunate player across the table.
Yeah, I think the worst part of that situation. So when something I've realized, because I've been playing against these like Jeskai control decks that are the plan is similar to what Miracles was trying to do. Is basically you just win with a giant sorcery, that being Fourth Aerolingus, right? The place where those decks beat me is Mystic Sanctuary. Being able to just like, and you can do this too, just put your like game winning sorcery back on top of your deck after I counter it. It doesn't matter how many cards I draw against your deck if we're at parity. Because I only have 4 Force of Wills in my deck. Eventually I'm going to run out of Force of Wills, and you have at least one more copy of your I win card. And I had to do other things during the match too. I'm not playing ways to recur my Force of Wills. I'm just trying to tempo a deck like that out.
So not even a single endurance in your list right now?
No. So it's tough for me to be like, okay, well, like I can just outwit these decks. Like I literally have to be the aggro deck as a control deck playing against decks like yours. And they're playing stuff like Narset and Teferi, which is also like problematic for me because if I can't even counter your Fourth Aerolingus, like what are we doing, And as long as they can keep Draco and Guild Pact off the board, there's not a whole lot I can do to stay in the game. And after board, like a red Elemental Blast or blue Elemental Blast just blows me out of the water with being able to target my ley line.
Yeah, I do think that we have sort of moved past the time of Fourth Aerolingus being a reasonable card. I think that's like, it's just one of those cards where in those kinds of decks against those kinds of matchups, it's been good because it's a way to press advantage in a way where you're not really going to have to fight over combat really at all. Yeah. And so the Monarchy just like gets to run away because you can't interact with it. But the world that we're in now, where like lower to the ground Beanstalk decks, I think are still the power outlier. Like Beanstalk is still the power outlier, but the best version of every power outlier is always going to be the lowest to the ground version because of the compressions of the format. So take any deck, and when you lower it down to the ground, and effectively like it's like, how do we adapt whatever the power outlier is into the Delver shell? Then that is going to be what will objectively be the best version of that thing. Because if it can operate doing what it's doing at the lowest amount of resources necessary to do so, then it may not have the staying power as like the longer game decks that we're talking about playing now. But those decks will have the capacity to operate when their opponents who are playing the Delver shells of compressing everything down. They can survive that compression because they're designed to play within within that framework. Where if we're playing things that are, a little bit clunkier, or, where any amount of disruption on your mana of any kind is going to delay you from being able to actually take any action, right? So if you have a card in your hand that you can't cast because that Delver shell of Days Wasteland plus whatever follow-up free action is causing you to like have a card sandbagged in your hand that you otherwise would have been able to deploy. So let me zoom out for a second. Let's say you were playing a deck and it had a 3-drop in it, and there's a position where you got wastelanded once, and now there's the 3-drop in your hand that had you not been wastelanded, you would have been able to convert. But because you got wastelanded, you can't convert. That's the clearest sign and of like, if you wanted to reach the top tables of a tournament, you got to cut those cards. You can't be in a position where you ever have those kinds of cards stranded. Now, maybe you have a card stranded, like you have a 2-drop and you got cut off your first land drop, never hit your second land drop. That's different because compressing beyond 2 mana is like, okay, then we're in a whole different world. That's an entirely different format that seems entirely implausible to be supported in any way. But Days in Wasteland have cut off 3s and 4-drops in reasonable ways, which is why like I think the only 3s and 4-drops that you see really are the game-winning effects. So that's like a Teferi being able to ensure that a combo sticks through, a la Breakfast, or maybe you see like Doomsday, which is being pushed out or being pushed by mana acceleration, so it's not really in the 3 or 4-drop space because it can counteract those things with faster mana. But otherwise, like every single 3-drop or 4-drop that you see in the format, for the most part, either wins the game on the spot or is being subsidized by some sort of mana acceleration. So,
yeah,
I mean, getting into we're bouncing around here, But the also the notion of like going back to opening hands in the dark that you would keep if you were playing or leaning towards a control list. If you open your hand and go, okay, I have this proactive strategy, but assume that you get wastelanded once. Assume that you have to play around at least 1 days. And if that hand is non-functional around those things, assuming that you're under any amount of pressure in the early game, then that hand might not be operational, even if it looks good because it has a mix of lands and spells.
Yeah. Well, this is the opportunity cost, Phil, of playing Surveil lands as well, because my deck, I'm playing 3 tap lands. I'm playing 1 Triome and 2 I'm playing like a Bayou and a Tundra as Surveil lands, right? Just to see how good those are. And there were several times over the weekend playing and IRL where like that punished me. Like I was like, I guess I just can't cast like I wanted to cast Orcish Bowmasters against my opponent. I already had all of my black sources out. The only black source that I could fetch was one of my 2 tapped black sources. And I was like, hold on, you're brainstorming? Give me 1 second. And I looked through my deck and I'm just like, oh no.
Yeah,
you dummy.
It's interesting. I actually find that having had the Surveil lands in the format for a while now, I actually think that the Surveil lands are at their weakest in our types of control decks. Even though tapped lands that let you adjust your draw step seems valuable because card selection and how you line up your card seems reasonable. The problem is that card selection in our types of control decks is never really been the problem. That's not really a bottleneck that we've ever had. A bottleneck that we do have is getting through development. And if you're putting in a tap land that exposes you to getting disrupted during your development, then that actually is going to exacerbate your problem, not solve your problem. So in areas where we've seen the lower to the ground decks that don't want to take the time to cantrip to develop, right? Like if they don't need to get through development, they just need to find a certain subset of cards or a certain combination of cards, then you spending that first turn ensuring that your land drop doesn't get wasted through a fetch to then surveil whatever thing you're looking for. So think about something like Epic Storm, playing multiple Surveil lands. The Surveil lands, for the deck trying to put a combination of cards together, is so overwhelmingly better than us trying to find whatever piece we're looking to interact with, because we're looking to play the long game. So every Surveil that a combo deck or any other deck that's playing lower to the ground or wants to end the game faster, every Surveil that they search, that they dump to get close to what they need to end the game immediately, think about how much more impactful that Surveil is than the deck like that we're playing that is trying to go to turn 10, turn 12.
Yeah.
Like a Surveil over the course of a 10-turn game is much less impactful than a Surveil over the course of a 2.5-turn game.
Yeah. So no, you're right. I mean, if you're fixing, 33% of your draws versus, 10% of your draws, and you're losing, that incredibly important step of the game where you're like, okay, well, I need to do something on turn 2 to stop your thing, right? Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's often seen that like because in younger formats where tap lands with some amount of ability on them is usually reserved for the control decks or the decks that are looking for longer. But that's also
colonnades and whatnot. Yeah, of course.
But typically, that is also because the younger format style control decks also play a bevy load more lands than what we would play in Legacy. So if you look at your Pioneers or your Standards of old, where you would play a control deck, you're looking anywhere from 27 to 30 lands, right? And having any amount of those lands to ensure you hit your land drops, having any additional amount of text alongside color fixing is going to be pretty valuable over the course of a game, because the whole point of those decks is to hit your land drop, stop what they're doing, hit your land drop, stop what you're doing. Where in Legacy, that's not the case, because in Legacy, you need to be able to hit your land drops to get to development to be able to cast your spells, but you don't need to hit your land drops in the same way to cast your counter magic. In the younger formats, if you miss your land drop and then you can't cast your counter magic to line up with whatever they're doing, that counter magic is going to rot in your hand. But in Legacy, you cannot afford to pay mana for counter magic. So that changes the paradigm, right? Like your deck is playing what, 21 lands?
19 lands. I just looked, pulled it up.
19 lands with your Lorien Revealed. I bounce back and forth constantly between 18 and 19 lands.
No Lorien Revealed, sir.
Okay, so you're just on 19 straight up.
19 lands.
I bounced back and forth between 18 and 19 lands with 4 Lorien Revealed. Now, additionally, Lorien Revealed being part or something that you're considering in your mana base, right? Now, that is not a land on its own. It does represent a second land if you have your first land, but that second land is only represented if that land comes into play untapped. right? In which case, the Surveil land is also not good, because if you get disrupted, if you get wasted on your Surveil land before you get to untap to use the mana to cast your Land Revealed, which you're using as to represent your second land, then you just get totally destroyed, right? Yep. So, again, it's another weakness of if that's where your deck is positioned to try and go long to hit those kinds of land drops. But if you look at the top decks, they don't really need to function past 2, right? Like, the top end of Scaminator is Psychic Frog. The top end of Beanstalk is Beanstalk. And the top end of any combo deck is whatever Dark Ritual does. So, like, regarding, like, where your curve stops, the only decks that get punished for playing Surveil lands in any real meaningful way is the decks that are trying to get to their 3rd land drop, their 4th land drop, like reliably, in order to actually convert their game plan. So I'm a 4 Mystic Sanctuary gamer. I gotta get to Mystic Sanctuary mana. If anything, I want to cut the plains more than I want to do anything else. Every single time I update my deck list on Moxfield, and I update it a lot, I keep it pretty up to date. I literally had somebody comment earlier today saying, Phil, there's literally there's no win condition in your deck. And
I had to be like, is it thwart?
And I said, excuse you, not only is thwart an implicit win condition, and then should be my only win condition, but I also have the win condition of right now, I'm testing out Tameo, and Tameo doesn't have a win condition on it, really. But the person who commented was like, there's no way for you to win in your 75 other than your opponent conceding. That's not true. Thwart is inevitability, which means that I can never deck. So that there's that. But also, I have a JVP in the list right now. I'm testing out a little JVP alongside my Tameo. And
Jace Vryn's Prodigy?
Yeah, dude. And the backside of Jace Vryn's Prodigy's ultimate is a win con. How did they not see that?
What is his ultimate?
Dude, his ultimate is every time you get an emblem with every time you cast a spell, you Tome Scour your opponent.
Oh, yeah, mill 5 cards. Okay.
Easy game.
I mean, yeah, that's like the 4-mana Chandra that had 4 things on it. That was like, after you ultimate it, it just deals 5 damage to every time you cast a spell.
Yeah, every time you cast a spell, you just flame axe your opponent. Or, you know, and it's like,
lava
axe, whatever. Is flame axe a card? Who gives a shit? Like, all that. Like, of course, whatever the emblems are. But, you know, come on now. I'm not. Realistically, if we were true to the control spirit, the only win condition would be thwart and nothing else. Like, if you want to be a real control gamer, you got to embrace. I mean,
I used to tell people this when they would look at my old school deck, because I was playing Stasis, and they'd be like, "Well, what's your win con?"
Giving up is the win con.
I didn't play Felden's Cane.
Yeah.
They'd be like, "Well, how do you win?" I'm like, "Well, like out of the board, I can play Felden's Cane or Black Vice, but honestly, the real win condition for this deck is I played Howling Mine. You drew an extra card. Game over.
That's it. That's it. And that's quality. That's quality, right?
It's all killer, no filler. Like, there's nothing in my deck that I draw that I go, man, I didn't need that, you know?
Yeah, dude. I'm on the side. If you want to really get down to your control roots, you got to embrace, like, you got to look at win conditions in ways that people are not looking at any other win conditions. So my opponent was like, Phil, or not my opponent, this commenter was like, Phil, there are no win conditions. And this actually comes up a lot when people look at my deck list and they're like, you don't have any win conditions, or, you know, what are your threats? And I'm like, you and I both have a very clearly different idea of what counterbalance is.
Yeah.
Because people are like, Phil, you have no threats in your deck to win the game. And I'm like, how many turns has counterbalance been on the board, my guy?
Yeah. And let's talk about also, you know, what if your opponent has no threats?
Yeah. It's like,
you know, like
if
what
you
if you just counter all of their threats?
You want to know what the real win condition of a control player is? Morale.
Yeah.
If you want to be a real control player, then your expectation should be, I'm playing until my opponent breaks.
Yes.
And you should love that.
And more often than not, when we're watching you on 90s MTG, that is how you win.
Now, granted, that also means that you have to play at a certain speed. So that means that you got to know.
Yeah, well, that's huge.
You got to know your deck, and you got to know how your cards are supposed to line up against a given matchup. And so, like, every time your opponent tells you what deck they're on, you should mentally be able to map approximately what their main board is, and then know approximately what their sideboard is, and then know approximately what post-board games actually look like.
Yeah.
Unless you know for sure that they're playing stock, in which case you should just know exactly how your cards are supposed to line up, and then line them up that way.
Well, so here we are. We've got, you know, what, 7-8 more weeks until the end of August. So we can expect a grief ban.
Hey, so here's my take on the impending grief ban.
Yeah,
I'm hoping that I legitimately hope that they do take more action than just grief.
I do too. Yes.
I'm hoping that like the grief ban 2 months after everybody assumed it was going to happen when it should have happened, blah blah blah. Like that, I feel like it'll be sort of the like tainted palate type of announcement if they only ban grief, because we'd be like, okay, so we wasted a summer when you guys could have just done this a long time ago, and like you didn't learn anything and you didn't listen to anybody and like all this stuff. So like if they grief ban, instead of us rejoicing for them finally agreeing and understanding what everybody is yearning for and giving it to us, it'll just be like, yeah, you're fucking late. Welcome to the party. Like, can you please like change your behavior next time? But if they overhaul a little bit more and like actually go after a bunch of other things that it made before like grief became its own thing because it's obviously the best deck or whatever, like I think it would be nice to see them go after a couple of other cards. We've talked about what those are. I don't think if any card goes that anybody's going to be like totally sad or upset. I know that, like they had talked about Orcus Bowmasters in the previous one, and Orcus Bowmasters play has only been down because of the scam eating in on itself. You know, so it's like if they don't look, if in the announcement they're like, we're banning grief, but we're leaving Bowmasters because we think that Bowmasters percentage went down, which is indicative that it's not. You know, it's like if essentially because that wouldn't be we understand what Bowmasters were doing to the format before. That's we don't grasp how inbred the game the meta became because of our lack of action. And because of our lack of action, that pushed this other card down, and now we're going to give it a pass because, you know, like, I think that would be, like, you know, once grief goes, it just opens the slots for whatever the other problem to slide back in was. And if anything, that's just a Delver evolution, right? Like, you ban the threat, you just put in the next best threat, and then you never actually have to choose which threat is the best optimal threat. Now, the other thing that I would be interested in is if they didn't want to ban grief, then start unbanning some shit. Like, it's like, if you want the power level to be at turn 0, turn 1, then you got to give people the tools to be able to recoup from the fact, like, I mean, hey, if I could top deck,
give me Ancestral Recall.
If we could, here's the trick, man. If you're playing Blue Black Scam and you're like, okay, I'm just gonna strip you down a bunch of cards, give me the opportunity to top deck my expressive iteration to make up the difference, right? If that's the terrible world we want to live in. Of grief existing, then you got to give us the
darkest possible future.
Yeah. If you have to assume that we all start on 5 cards, and I'm going to get beat down by an unblockable 3/2 before I get to take a game action, then at least give me the opportunity to go up cards, because right now the only ways to do that really is exactly and only Beanstalk, and the optimal way to build exactly and only Beanstalk is exactly and only the shell of Days Wasteland plus Beanstalk plus the free stuff.
Yeah, I go into this a little bit more in the bonus episode, but I wanted to leave everybody with the concept of like the inbred metagame from my perspective as a 15-year-old Magic player. Phil, do you know about Black Summer?
No.
So Black Summer was the first summer after the first Pro Tour when Necropotence was the deck. Literally like something like a 60% saturation. Everyone realized immediately that Necropotence was good. And it took them, they didn't ban it. They banned they restricted Hymn to Torak. But while this was happening, in the very same way that like Dothy Voidwalker is like sort of a proof of an inbred metagame. The card, can you guess the card that people were playing in their Necropotence decks to stop other Necropotence decks from winning? No, it was Contagion, the black pitch card that gave that cast weakness twice, basically. That you would hit your opponent's Pup Knights with that, because it was at the time Necropotence was like a black aggro deck. It was like you played Black Knight, you played Or the Ebon Hand, you played Knight of Stromgold. At the top end, you played Ishin Shade, and you just drain lifed. And order the Ebon Handed your way into victory.
So tougher pickings.
Yeah. So yeah, but the whole inbred metagame, very long precedent, and very easy to see. Once people stop playing Necropotence, no one really cared about playing Contagion anymore. So I wanted to leave everybody with that thought in their head as we move into late August. When late August comes and they decide to not ban Grief and be like, well, we're gonna just ban this other card that we think is an issue. We'll find out. But with that said, I wanted to thank everyone for watching. This is a slower news week, of course, but that's what happens in the summer. Once again, we've got the bonus episodes coming up once a week on Patreon, Spotify, and on YouTube if you subscribe there. And as always, a lot of people have been asking me about this with the ads and stuff. The ads are important to us because we need that to pay for editing and stuff like that. But if you want ad-free content, you get that with the subscriptions to Spotify, YouTube, or Patreon as well. So keep that in mind. And with that said, I want to thank everyone for watching, and we will catch you next week. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help sustain the legacy content ecosystem. Just subscribing to this channel goes a long way to reminding YouTube that people love and support this format. Now, if you really want to go the extra mile, you should think about supporting us through Patreon. Both the links for subscription and Patreon are right here. And if you're listening on an audio format, you can go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles. Thanks so much for watching.